They laughed at my dress, my mother and sister, while I stood there holding a bottle of wine like an idiot. It was Thanksgiving, and I had driven 5 hours to be with them. The dress, one I designed myself, I thought it would impress them. Instead, I became their inside joke. Later that night, I found the group chat, the screenshots, the captions. "Claire's couture disaster," my sister had written. My mother replied with a crying laughing emoji. That's when I stopped being their clown and started becoming their lesson, because that night I made one call and it changed everything. It was 2:07 a.m. when my phone buzzed. The screen lit up with Mom and the text, "Urgent, call me." My heart dropped. Naturally, I thought someone was in the hospital. Maybe Dad, maybe Aunt Gwen finally slipped in the tub. But no. When I called back, her voice was calm, even chipper. "Claire, honey, I need your help. The dress I planned for Aunt Susan's wedding is hideous. I can't wear it. You have better taste than all of us. Can you come home this weekend and fix it for me?" Not a single mention of sleep, or the time, or the fact that I had 3 client fittings the next day. I heard rustling on the other end, probably her flipping through magazines. I agreed. Of course I did. 2 days later, I canceled appointments, packed up my sewing kit, and drove 5 hours back to my childhood home in Connecticut. The house was exactly as I remembered: overgrown hydrangeas, chipped shutters, and the same slanted welcome mat I tripped over every year. When I walked in, Mom and my older sister, Brooke, were sitting at the dining table with her iPad. I barely had time to take off my coat before they burst into laughter. "Oh my God, Claire, look at this!" Brooke turned the screen toward me. It was a screenshot of Mom in the dress. A yellow chiffon mess I wouldn't have let my worst client touch. But it wasn't the dress they were laughing at. It was a filter they'd put on the photo, one that made Mom's head into a cartoon pear with googly eyes. "She says she looks like a banana slug," Brooke wheezed, wiping tears. "I told her she just needs your magic touch. You're the artist in the family." I tried to smile, but something twisted in my chest. That night, lying on the creaky mattress in my childhood room, I stared at the ceiling and listened to them giggling through the wall. I was 38 years old, unmarried, no kids, a freelance stylist in a city where everyone was younger, hungrier, louder, and still I paid half of Mom's mortgage each month and helped Brooke's oldest get into fashion school. They'd never thanked me for any of it. The next morning over coffee, Mom flipped through her iPad again. I was thinking maybe something a little more modest, for my age. Brooke chimed in without lifting her eyes from her phone. "Or just something that doesn't scream Claire." She chuckled. I froze. "What does that mean?" Brooke looked up, eyes wide with faux innocence. "Nothing, like dramatic, loud. It's your style." I nodded slowly. Then I went upstairs and cried into the same pillow I'd cried into when I was 12. That evening, while helping Mom take her measurements, I found a birthday card tucked inside her jewelry drawer. It had a list of names, cousins, nieces, nephews, all ticked off under invited. My name wasn't on it. I flipped it over. Birthday dinner guest list, written in Brooke's handwriting. I hadn't even known there was a dinner. Back in New York, the memory stuck with me. Like glitter you can't vacuum out. I started remembering more, like the time Mom introduced us at a gala and said, "This is Brooke, my daughter who teaches at Yale, and this is Claire. She's very artistic." Or when I was 15 and wanted to wear my red silk scarf to school, and Mom said, "You look like a streetwalker. Change before your father sees." I used to laugh those off, tell myself they were old school, or just being funny. But now something in me shifted. I opened a new note on my phone and titled it, "What They Say." I began writing every moment down, not just for proof, but to stop doubting myself. Have you ever been erased without anyone noticing? That's what it felt like they loved me as long as I stayed useful, as long as I paid, helped, agreed. But the moment I wanted to be seen, as a real person, not a tool, they laughed, mocked, edited me out of the story entirely. That's when I started seeing the pattern. Gaslighting when I spoke up. You're overreacting. Triangulation when I disagreed. Brooke thinks the same thing. Love bombing when I pulled away. You're our glue, Claire. Don't be dramatic. I had been trained to think loyalty meant silence. That family mattered more than feelings. That if I felt hurt, it was because I wasn't trying hard enough. But maybe I wasn't the problem. Maybe the punchline was me. I designed the dress for myself. Midnight blue, silk crepe, high collar with a sharp V cut in the back. Simple, elegant, powerful. Something that said, "I belong here," without begging for it. I spent a week stitching every seam by hand, pressing each pleat until it laid just right. I imagined my mother's face when she saw it, finally proud, maybe even impressed. Thanksgiving arrived cold and gray. Snow fell in lazy spirals as I pulled into the driveway. I had even done my makeup differently, subtle, like Brooke always said I should. I rang the bell, heart fluttering, dress wrapped under my coat to keep it perfect. When the door opened, Brooke's face froze for a millisecond before she said, "Wow, look at you." Mom followed, smiling too brightly. Very bold. I stepped into the dining room where the rest of the family had already gathered. My cousin Jared looked up from carving the turkey. Aunt Lynn raised her eyebrows, then quickly looked away. Brooke poured wine. Mom passed the rolls. No one mentioned the dress again. The silence sliced sharper than any insult. I sat through dinner, nodding, smiling, answering questions about how things were in the city. Brooke launched into a story about her daughter's recent science fair, complete with photos. Mom complimented Jared's wife's casserole 4 times. When I excused myself to the bathroom, I left my phone on the table. When I came back, it had lit up with a preview message. Brooke, "Tite no makai vai chua, nhu buom buom chai." I stared at it, the screen glowing like a confession. I slid into my coat without a word. "Heading out early," I muttered. No one asked why. The drive back to New York was a blur of snow and headlights. Somewhere outside of Hartford, I had to pull over, step out of the car, and vomit onto the roadside. My hands shook as I wiped my mouth. My teeth chattered, not from the cold, but from something deeper. Rage, shame, grief, layered like frostbite in my chest. I got back to my apartment just past midnight. I sat on the floor, still in the dress, the hem now dusted with salt and slush. I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I just sat, breathing, waiting for something inside me to shift. It didn't. The next morning, I woke with a pounding headache and a swollen throat. I opened the group chat where my mother, Brooke, and I had exchanged holiday plans, photos, check-ins for years. I scrolled until I found the picture of the dress I had sent 2 weeks earlier. No replies. Then I opened my notes app. I added a new entry to the list. Thanksgiving dress, butterfly on fire. From that moment, I stopped explaining. I started observing. I didn't confront them. I didn't text back. I didn't post cryptic quotes online. Instead, I listened. I remembered. I started collecting every comment, every joke that stung, every compliment with a hook in it. Mom saying, "You look healthy," while eyeing my waist. Brooks, "Oh, you styled that shoot? I thought it was someone else's work." Aunt Lynn asking, "Are you still doing your little fashion thing?" I wrote them down, all of it. I didn't know why yet, only that it made me feel less insane. Then one night, 3 weeks later, I was reorganizing old sketchbooks in my storage closet. I found a folded sheet inside the 2015 portfolio, a dress design I'd abandoned years ago. Asymmetrical neckline, deep emerald satin, pleated waist. My handwriting across the bottom, Venom Bloom. Something tugged at me. I pulled up Brooke's Instagram. There she was, grinning next to a rack of samples at a product launch. Tag, a Bloom line wear, her new collab with a boutique brand. I zoomed in on the dress in the background. Same neckline, same waist, same fabric. The caption read, "Inspired by Brooke's early sketches and personal vision." I couldn't breathe. It wasn't just mockery anymore. It was theft. History rewritten. My past rebranded as hers. All those hours I spent in college building that portfolio, all those nights crying over rejected grants, now hanging on a rack under her name. I sat there for 10 minutes. Then I stood up, walked to the kitchen, and made tea. I didn't panic. I didn't rage. I wrote one more note, Venom Bloom, stolen design. Then I opened a new document and typed the question, what would you do if your past was being sold? Under someone else's name. I spent the next week diving into Brooke's digital life. Not scrolling casually. No, this was research. Every photo on her Instagram, every press article she'd been mentioned in, every LinkedIn update. I approached it like a crime scene. Methodical, clinical. She was smart, I'll give her that. Most of the pieces in her new collection were just different enough from anything I'd published, but design has a fingerprint, and Venom Bloom had mine all over it. In one launch post, she stood in front of a garment rack, wearing a blazer I recognized, not because I owned it, but because I had drafted it 5 years ago as part of a concept I'd shelved, corporate contradictions. Same double lapel offset, same double slit cuffs. The caption read, "My personal favorite piece, classic lines with a rebellious soul." Rebellious soul? She had stolen mine. I downloaded every photo, took screenshots, compiled them into a folder named Proof, Not Paranoia. I didn't rage. I didn't cry. I brewed my tea, added honey, and kept scrolling. Then one night, while scrolling through tagged posts, I saw a photo from a fashion intern at the event. It was blurry, taken from the back, but in the far corner, I saw my mother, sitting in the front row, not just attending, clapping. I zoomed in until the pixels bled together. My mother, in pearls and her best coat, smiling up at Brooke like she was the second coming of Coco Chanel. She never even followed my business account. I closed the laptop and sat in silence, my knuckles white around the mug. Something boiled behind my eyes. That night, I got a message request on Instagram from an account with no profile picture. "You don't know me, but I know your work. I interned with Bloomline last year. I recognize at least 3 of your old sketches in their latest capsule. I wanted to say something, but your mom scares people more than Brooke." I stared at the message. My mother, not just complicit, but intimidating, active. She had always been sweet in public, polished, PTA president, church flower committee. But now I wondered if that was just her stage voice. Because behind the scenes, she'd always known how to twist. I responded, "Thank you, you've helped more than you know." Then I opened a fresh page in my notebook and wrote, "She's not just the silence, she's the storm." The next morning, I contacted a lawyer. She specialized in intellectual property disputes, especially in fashion. A woman with a steel tone and a leopard print scarf who didn't flinch when I said, "I think my sister's been stealing my designs for years." She asked for proof. I sent her the folder. She replied within hours. "This isn't just inspiration, this is theft." Then I reached out to an old client, Lena Alvarez. Years ago, I'd styled her for a low-budget indie film that unexpectedly hit Sundance. Now she ran a fiercely independent fashion blog with a cult following. "I've been following the Bloom line launch," she said when we spoke. Something about it felt familiar. I told her everything, all of it. She didn't interrupt once. At the end, she said, "Let me work on something, quietly." Lastly, I reached out to Aunt Miriam, my mother's sister, a woman I hadn't seen in 6 years. Last I heard, she'd been cut off after a family blow-up nobody explained. She picked up on the first ring. Her voice cracked when she said, "Claire?" "I think I know why Mom turned on you," I said. She exhaled. "Took you long enough." We met for lunch. She told me stories that sounded like mine, but earlier. Undermining, manipulating, quiet rewrites of family history where my mother always emerged the hero. By the end of the lunch, I asked her, "Would you vouch for me?" She nodded without hesitation. That weekend, I sent Mom and Brooke an invitation to a private trunk show. Velvet Revival was the name. I used my business letterhead, rented a small venue, hired a photographer to set up lights outside, but there was no show. It was bait. I waited. 3 days later, I got a call from the boutique I sometimes partnered with for event rentals. "Claire, this is weird. Someone just called, said you were emotionally unstable, and had been reported for erratic behavior in the past. Wanted to know if we were sure about hosting your event." I asked, "Did they give a name?" She hesitated. "They said they were your mother." I didn't reply. Instead, I lit a candle, opened my window, and let the February air cut through the tension in my apartment. I wrote one sentence in my notebook. "If she's sabotaging me, is that still love?" The article dropped at exactly 7 p.m. on Christmas Eve. The title, "When Family Becomes Your Worst PR Nightmare." Lena had warned me. It's going to explode. I pulled no punches. I didn't read it right away. I already knew the story. It was mine. I lit a cinnamon candle, poured a glass of wine, and opened my closet. From the back, I pulled out the red velvet heels I hadn't worn in years, the ones my mother once called clown shoes. I took a picture of them by the window, city lights behind them glowing like a crown. I posted the photo to Instagram. No caption, just 3 words. "Soft doesn't mean silent." Then I turned off my phone. I didn't need to see the comments. I didn't need to count likes. What I needed was quiet. By midnight, my voicemail was full. 33 missed calls, 17 from Brooke, 9 from my mother, 3 from unknown numbers. I let them pile up. The next morning, I turned my phone back on. The internet had caught fire overnight. The article had been shared by 2 major fashion accounts, picked up by a gossip blog, and reposted by 3 minor celebrities. Screenshots of Brooke's designs side by side with my old sketches were being dissected in comment sections. One post had over 10,000 likes. I used to think Brooke was original. Now I see she's just Claire in disguise. I brewed coffee and scrolled, detached. The rage I expected to feel wasn't there. Instead, I felt clean. Mom called again just after noon. I let it ring. Then came a text. "You've humiliated your family. For what? Internet clout?" I didn't answer. By sunset, Brooke posted a story. Tearful apology, vague language. I never meant to hurt anyone. Her comment section turned into a battlefield. But the big blow hadn't landed yet. I opened the old flash drive I'd kept tucked in a drawer since 2019. Back when I was still foolish enough to hope that documenting pain would make it easier to survive. The audio file was labeled 9/12 Dinner. It was a recording from a dinner party at Mom's house. I had stepped out to take a call. She hadn't known I left my phone recording on the table. Her voice, crisp, confident, laced with superiority. She thinks she's something special now because of that fashion nonsense. But if I hadn't paid for those damn summer programs, she'd be folding jeans at the mall. Laughter from her friend. She owes everything to me. She just doesn't know it. I listened to it twice, not because I doubted it, but because I needed to hear, one more time, just how far her love had limits. I clipped the audio, uploaded it to Instagram with a simple caption. "Here's your matriarchal mentorship." It went viral in under 2 hours. People weren't just angry, they were energized. The audio played on loops in TikTok rants, stitched into videos about toxic parenting. Threads exploded with women saying, "This is what emotional blackmail sounds like." I didn't respond to comments. I didn't reply to texts. I just watched. Because sometimes silence is power, but not everyone stayed silent. At 3 a.m., my inbox pinged. Subject line, "I saw it all." The email was from my father. We hadn't spoken in months, years, really. He'd always been present but not active, neutral, the man behind the paper. I opened the message. It was short. "Claire, I saw it all. I did nothing. I failed you. I'm sorry." "Dad." I stared at the screen until the words blurred. Then I cried. Not the beautiful cinematic cry, no. The full-bodied, shaking, airless sob. I slid down to the floor and pressed my forehead to my knees. For the first time since this all began, I let myself fall apart. There, in the dark, I stopped being a strategist, a fighter, a storyteller. I was just someone's daughter. And for once, I let myself grieve what that had meant. 2 weeks after the recording went public, I was invited to speak on a podcast called Unmuted. The episode title was simple but sharp. Why You Can't Heal Where You're Harmed. I hesitated before agreeing. I wasn't a public speaker. I wasn't an influencer. I was just tired. But something in me knew it was time to stop whispering. The host, Dina, welcomed me like an old friend. We didn't script anything. She asked about family, betrayal, silence, and the moment I decided to say enough. "I used to think love meant loyalty," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Now I know love includes boundaries. Without them, it's not love, it's ownership." That episode became their most streamed that season. By the end of the week, I had 5 new emails from women who said the story made them feel seen. 10 days later, a stranger on the subway leaned in and whispered, "Thank you for speaking up." I left my mother's house last night. I didn't know how far the story had traveled until I opened an email with the subject, "You don't know me, but I know her." The woman had once worked at a non-profit board where my mother served as chair. "She made my life hell," the message read. Passive-aggressive emails, public humiliation, gaslighting. When I finally stood up to her, I was forced out. Then the line that stayed with me. "I thought I was crazy until I read your story." It felt like exhaling after holding my breath for years. I wasn't alone. Soon after, I launched an online forum called Velvet Tribe, a space for people, mostly women, who had experienced family-based manipulation. We weren't a support group. We were a survival collective. We shared tactics, how to disengage, how to document, how to reclaim your narrative. Within a month, it grew to over 3,000 members. A designer in Italy messaged me, offering to collaborate on a capsule collection inspired by resilience in silence. I started getting invitations to speak, to consult, to design. But this time it wasn't for family events or silent favors. It was for me, and I said yes, not out of obligation, but out of alignment. Justice didn't roar. It didn't come with applause or victory speeches. It came like a slow-moving tide, persistent, undeniable. I didn't gloat. I didn't retaliate. I just moved forward. One day at a bookstore in Brooklyn, a woman approached me holding The Velvet Thread, a zine someone had made based on the podcast episode. She said, "You made it easier to name the wound, and that gave me the power to start healing." I smiled, genuinely. Sometimes justice doesn't arrive to punish. Sometimes it arrives to witness, and that, I've learned, is enough. Claire was sitting on the wooden floor of her studio when the envelope arrived. No return address. Just her name, handwritten in blue ink, with a single velvet ribbon knotted around the top. Inside, she found a small bundle of keepsakes, a photo of her as a child in a red scarf, a drawing she made at age 9 titled "My Future Dress," and a tiny faded brooch, velvet, shaped like a single calla lily. There was no note, but she knew who it came from. Lisa, her childhood best friend, the only one who ever defended her in front of Brooke. They hadn't spoken in over a decade. Claire held the brooch for a long time, thumb grazing its soft surface. It was the same one her mother once called tacky and tried to throw out during a spring cleaning rampage. Claire had rescued it then, and here it was again, rescued. She smiled. 2 days later, a letter arrived from the family lawyer, her mother's will. She had left Claire a sum of money, a property share, and a letter expressing regret for recent misunderstandings. Claire declined it all. Except for one thing. She requested the velvet brooch. Officially, symbolically, it now sat at the center of her small gallery, Velvet Rising. The exhibition featured designs inspired by reclamation. Each guest was hand-picked, stylists who were pushed out, artists silenced by family, women who had been told, "You're too much." She stood in the center of the room, watching them sip wine, laugh, touch fabric. None of them asked about her mother. None of them needed to, because they knew. And that was enough. As the lights dimmed and the crowd thinned, Claire sat on a bench facing a glass case where the brooch rested on black velvet. She whispered, not to the brooch, not to the past, but to herself. What if revenge isn't about hurting them, but about finally loving yourself? The first thing I did was change my number. I didn't tell anyone, not even my assistant. I deleted every contact that didn't serve peace. Family, old friends who only reached out when I was useful. Exes who thought closure came in late-night texts. I created a new work email, set up 2 phones, one public, one private. I changed my mailing address to a P.O. box, locked my social media under aliases known only to collaborators. Claire, the stylist, still existed, but now she was curated, distilled. The rawness was mine alone. The noise didn't stop immediately. It dwindled, then flared, then faded. Brooke tried again, through press, mutual contacts, even a letter. I didn't respond. My mother never reached out again. In every interview request that followed, I answered the same way. My family existed. I'm building a new one. No elaboration, no invitation. There was a quiet power in not retelling the wound. At first, the silence felt unnatural, too empty, too still. I had been conditioned to live in reaction, to respond, to anticipate. Without the chaos, I wasn't sure who I was. But slowly, a different rhythm emerged. I started waking up without dread. I made tea without bracing for a phone call. I spent weekends designing for pleasure, not approval. I took walks in the park, people watching, sketching strangers' coats. I remembered what it was like to be curious without being exhausted. I attended therapy every other week, not to fix myself, but to understand the versions of me I had built to survive. I learned to say no without explanation, and yes without guilt. Peace, I found, wasn't dramatic. It was subtle, gentle, like a room with perfect lighting. One afternoon, I watched an old couple on a bench, holding hands, and realized I no longer envied anyone who had perfect families. I just hoped they had real ones. Real meant flawed, honest, protective without being possessive. So I started building mine, not by blood, but by choice. Dina from the podcast became a confidant. Lena, a collaborator turned kindred spirit. Aunt Miriam and I had brunch every first Sunday of the month. Together, we formed a different kind of tribe. We didn't speak of betrayal often. We didn't need to. We were too busy living what came after. The idea came to me during a panel on creative ownership. I was asked, how do we make sure women like you aren't erased again? I replied without thinking, by giving the next one's tools before they need rescue. That night, I sketched out the framework for Reclaim the Mirror, a scholarship fund for women from toxic family backgrounds pursuing fashion, design, or the arts. The first application cycle opened with a single post. We received 312 submissions in 3 weeks. Stories that mirrored mine, stories that broke me open and stitched me back together. We selected 6 recipients that year. One of them, a 19-year-old named Kira, sent me a letter that read, "You gave me permission to exist loudly." I framed it. The book followed. Velvet Rising, Healing in Style. It wasn't a memoir, it was a blueprint. Part storytelling, part resource guide. Equal parts raw and refined. I dedicated it to every woman who stopped asking for a seat and started building her own table. It hit indie bestseller lists within the first month, but none of that compared to the opening night of my solo exhibition. Velvet Rising, the collection debuted in a refurbished church-turned-gallery downtown. The walls were draped in reclaimed fabrics. Each piece told a chapter: betrayal in brocade, the silence gown, resilience in thread. Every guest had received a handwritten invitation. Every detail was intentional. As the room buzzed with soft conversation, I stepped into the back corner of the studio, alone. A small framed plaque caught the light from the chandelier above. It read, "Not everything inherited is worth keeping. Not everything broken needs fixing. Some things just need to be let go." I touched the glass gently, then turned toward the sound of laughter, of clinking glasses, of new voices speaking new stories, and I walked into the light.